I want to first acknowledge that beautiful meditation that Oliver created. Oh my goodness. It really amplified my own preparation. So I appreciate that. And I also want to acknowledge this safe space that's created here with you, Denise and Mark, and your intentions, and how wonderful I feel coming to share this. And it's interesting because the presentation that you're going to receive is outside of time, as I'll talk about when I start. And it's beautiful to see the dovetailing of the previous conversation we were having before we started the recording, how we were talking about the nature of time. So it's like it's a gift as I prepared this presentation to now hear that the room is totally prepared to receive the model of the presentation that I put together. So thank you for that. Yeah. There's a lot in my background. So rather than talking about who I am in terms of like a CV, I'll just say that who I am in terms of a possibility or a commitment. And that because you can find out about me online. There's a lot of stuff out there online about me. But as a commitment, as a possibility, I am about universal improvement, bringing new into the world, bringing never been done before into the world, bringing fun and joy in the accomplishment of those things into the world. And so that's who I stand to be. And that's my possibility. And that's what I believe Copiosis represents. And so I think that's enough about me. Let's talk about Copiosis. Jarek is more familiar with this group than I am. So Jarek, do you think you need, Jarek has a little bit of a conflict right now at this time in this, but he'll be back in a little bit. But most of you know who Jarek is, right? Can we skip that also and just jump right into the presentation? Is that okay? Okay, good. All right, let's do that. So I'm going to share my screen, and in sharing, I'm going to start the presentation. Just 1 second here. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, great. All right, let's do this. So exciting. Okay, so Copiosis is a collection of beliefs embodied in a framework that allows humanity into access to several probable future realities, none of which our organization has any direct control as to which one's going to become the actual reality for us all. So it's a bridging mechanism, a bridging dynamic that allows humanity to have access to these probable future realities. And the presentation you're about to hear has never been presented before, in the sense that rather than going through a lot of features or benefits about how Copiosis works, instead what you're going to hear and see are a series of stories. I'm going to tell a bunch of stories, and I expect that the stories will entertain you, but also provide a really powerful understanding of how Copiosis works from the standpoint of the stories. And the stories are going to take place outside of time. So we're going to continue the conversation we began with at the beginning of this call, and step outside of time and look at Copiosis as though it has been accomplished already. And so some of the stories I'm going to tell are occurring in the past in reference to where we're standing. And then other stories are going to be told in the present tense as though they are happening today. And my expectation is that by the end of the presentation, you'll have not just a clear sense of how Copiosis works, not that you won't have questions afterward, but you'll have a clear sense of how Copiosis works at an intuitive level. And then also you'll have an emotional response to what Copiosis offers as this bridging, door opening mechanism. So To set the context for those of you who have not looked at Copiosis, I want to set the context with this interview that Jarek and I participated in with these wonderful hosts at Upgrading Society, who the hosts characterize Copiosis in a remarkably accurate way. So I'm going to play this video, and we tested this before, so hopefully you guys can hear it. For those of you with your video on, please give me a thumbs up to ensure to confirm that you can hear this video. You can hear this video. Here we go.
I've seen quite a few different examples of looking at the long-term benefit and then rewarding based on long-term benefit instead of immediate benefit, right? Being able to take the net effect of doing something good and being able to obtain the value from it now, right? I've seen people try to do that. I've seen people trying to do it with technology and blockchain. I've seen people try to do it in financial world. I've seen in education. But this feels to me like a fully thought out, fully baked version of what this could be. And this is, if we go down, like y'all are going down these meandering paths and you might love it, but when you get to the end, this is going to be the castle at the end of the path. And this is where it all is going. And I haven't seen a fully developed version of this. I haven't seen a non-capitalistic still version of just creating more value right in the present value by being more able to accurately determine what you're doing down the road, right? Using algorithms and using predictive technology. But this doesn't incorporate the full spectrum because it's still a finite, you're still in a competitive world where this takes out the ceiling and it takes out the capacity and just requires the assimilation to create unlimited. And the others are just like a better mousetrap, right? Where this is saying we're going to like change the way we think about mice altogether.
So the idea there of changing the way we think about mice altogether is exactly the approach we're taking to economics. And so the goal of Copiosis is to, in the end state, create an economy of gifts where people are doing things simply because they love doing those things, kind of like how we're gathered here today. And we're doing these things not because we're going to get a reward for the things we're doing, but for the inherent satisfaction of being a creator. That's what Copiosis is designed to create for everybody on the planet, so that everybody can have this experience in their intimate, personal life connected to other people. So the underlying philosophy of Copiosis, this is funny, when I showed Jarek this presentation draft, he laughed because these 30 questions are questions that just kind of rolled off his head when he was having a conversation with someone else about our underlying philosophy. And these 30 questions are all answered with the same answer, and the answer is yes. And this is the subject posed in every one of these questions provides the fundamental understanding necessary to really understand what it is that we're doing with Copiosis as an economic model. And that is, as I said, creating a world where people can enjoy their life free of any constraint, much how Oliver's meditation this morning freed us to be present and aware in this moment of now. So you don't have to look at all these 30 questions. Any one of them that you look at, any single one or a couple of them can give you the flavor of the approach that we're taking with this innovation. So this is a common graphic that we share in social media because while it looks relatively simple, it describes the economic dynamics of what Copiosis is all about. It is a circular economy that moves in one direction. There are no two-way transactions in Copiosis. So at the top of this graphic, people who do things for other people or the planet are called producers, and they do what they love. And in doing what they love, they create things, products and services and solutions that when consumed by people those things are produced for, the consumption of those things produce some sort of result. And that result is then observed, quantified, and measured by an organization of people who are loosely formed and working together collaboratively to analyze these results. And then those results are codified and then fed into a computational model or algorithm that produces a number. And the number represents something specific that we'll talk about in a minute. And as a result of producing that number, the people who produce the thing that's being consumed are awarded with society's recognition of their contribution of value to society. And so that is essentially how this model, this framework works. And I'll talk a little bit in more detail here in a second about the details of the framework. So that illustration I showed a minute ago creates a new standard of value, a new concept of value that we call net benefit value. And net benefit value is essentially defined as the benefits that result from any action and the harm that results from any action, both sets of data quantified, compared, and then arithmetically calculated so that on the net, if an action produces more harm than good, you have negative net benefit value. If it produces more beneficial outcomes than harm, then you have net beneficial value. And the actors who produce this result get a reward or an award that we call net benefit rewards. And the net benefit rewards replace all debt-based currencies on the planet. So rather than getting money as a recognition of your contribution of value, you get this unit of award called net benefit rewards. And the rewards you receive can only be used by you to consume a certain class of products and services that we define as luxury items. Everything else in this economic paradigm is either classified as a capital good or a necessity. And those other two categories, capital goods and necessities, are provided to everyone at no cost to them, as determined and decided by the people who own those things. But if you want a luxury item, you have to accumulate sufficient net benefit rewards in order to unlock the gateway that the owner of the luxury puts on that product or service. And once you unlock that gateway using the quantity of net benefit rewards that the producer has assigned to the gateway, that amount of net benefit rewards is removed from your account and it just kind of disappears. It burns away from your account. It does not go to the person who produced the luxury item. So you unlock this luxury item and then you take possession of the luxury item and consume it. And then the result of your consumption of that luxury item produces some sort of result, a reward, a benefit. Hopefully it's a net positive benefit. And when that net benefit shows up in the world, then the producer of the luxury receives his or her own net benefit award from the algorithm. So when you, to put in today's language, when you purchase a luxury in Copiosis, you do not hand over your net benefit rewards to the person who has produced the luxury. Your net benefits rewards just disappears and the producer of the luxury receives net benefit rewards as you consume the luxury item. And so long as that luxury item continues to benefit you, the producer of that luxury item continues to receive net benefit reward. So over time, producers, and that's pretty much anyone on the planet, producers receive ongoing streams of net benefit awards for past acts that have produced net benefit value. So that's the nature of the net benefit value concept. So now to clarify this even more, we're going to talk about, or I'm going to show this video, it's going to talk about how net benefit rewards are calculated.
The Copiosis algorithm rewards people NBR when their action creates more good than harm. An algorithm is just a math formula. How can a math formula decide which actions create more good than harm? Consider a hypothetical HIV cure created by this team of 6 researchers. The cure is being used all over the world. First, the algorithm asks what resources were used to make the cure and how plentiful and renewable is each resource. It then assigns a number to the answers. Next, it asks how many people are producing HIV cures and how many people want the cure. Then it assigns a number to that. Many people believe benefit is subjective, being different for different people. We agree. That's why the algorithm next asks patients how satisfied they are with the cure. It then uses the best science to see if the cure increases human well-being or decreases human well-being. Next, the algorithm asks how much of society the cure impacts, a small town or a massive segment of humanity. The algorithm then asks, does creating the cure harm or benefit the natural environment? Finally, the algorithm asks how the cure benefits humanity overall. Does it make humanity more or less resilient? The algorithm uses all these values to calculate a result. That number is the net benefit produced when people use this hypothetical HIV cure. This calculation happens over and over at many different levels of society simultaneously, so we can reward every person who helps make the cure. NBR is given only after these questions are answered, so there can be a delay before one's reward comes. That's why necessities are provided to everyone at no cost. But once the rewards start and as the benefits continue, people responsible for creating them continue receiving their NBR. So Copiosis creates passive income streams for anyone who makes people and the planet better off. By asking 8 questions, our algorithm can measure and reward any human action based on the real effect the action has on people and the planet. And that's how the Copiosis algorithm works. Far better than paying people money. Copiosis, a no-risk, no-tax, no-cost, free market, moneyless economy where everybody wins and nobody loses.
So now these basic questions that were presented in that video work together with local community values, regional values, and overall human values to determine how much net benefit is produced from a given action. So this means that, for example, a fur coat in Alaska, based on the community's values, the producer of that fur coat would probably receive more NBR for providing that fur coat to consumers in Alaska than someone who's providing fur coats that are designed to keep people warm in some place like Hawaii. Moving up to the regional level, if a region and a community disagree with certain values, then the regional values will have greater weight on the calculation than the community value if the product or service in question has a regional impact. And then if the product or service in question has a global impact, then the overall human values are considered more heavily than the community values because of the impacts of that product or service. So in this way, the computational algorithm talked about in the video there can scale up or down depending on what product or service is produced and what is the impact that product or service is having on humanity. So now let's get into the stories, because this is the part I've been waiting for, because this is going to be fun to talk about. And we're going to step outside of time now, and we're going to look at a scenario in which the transition to Copiosis has already happened. And in viewing this transition from this perspective, we're going to look at a couple of people, 7 people, I believe it is, their experiences in what we call the first mover nation. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about the details of how the transition to Copiosis happened. I think it's important that you understand this when we start talking about copiosis, some of your questions that will naturally be prompted by the vignettes hopefully will be answered by this part of the presentation. So many people believed back in 2020 that capitalism, communism, and other debt-based economies were on the verge of collapse, and that there was a sense of urgency that humanity needed to move from where they were at that time to something different. Because if they didn't, there was going to be great calamity at both the social level, the economic level, and even the environmental level, as some of people who perceived doomsday occurring were looking at the environment and how the environment was changing. But what we know now, looking back then, is that instead of a collapse, what was happening was an emergence. And in that emergence, the old way was fading and the new way was emerging from that old way. And so copiosis was an opportunity that opened a door to this new way. And as a result of that, we had to see what was fading out, fade out, so that the new could emerge from that. And that's what Copiosis was offering humanity, a new way of looking at the world. And the team that was putting together Copiosis created a 7-phase transition plan. The first 3 phases worked together to generate the awareness, provided the information so that people could understand this new future, and also provide the political framework that allowed the leaders to be able to appreciate, adopt, and help usher forward this innovation. Over time, the first 3 phases of that transition created relationships with the Copiosis organization that allowed the Copiosis organization to realize opportunities to amass a tremendous amount of funding that was necessary to create the innovation in real life. But some of those relationships petered out because the value match wasn't there. The Copiosis team believed at the time that it was more important that a cultural fit exists between strategic partners rather than just taking in money from any place, because they believed that the culture represented the spirit of the intent behind the innovation. And if the culture didn't match, then any amount of money would not produce the results that they were expecting to see emerge out of this transition. But knowing what they knew, the Copiosis team, based on their fundamental philosophy, knew that even though funding opportunities came and went, the right funding opportunity would present itself. And that's exactly what happened. And as a result of building a strategic partnership with that organization, Copiosis realized all the funding it needed at that time to move forward with the next phases of its implementation. So with that funding, what the Copiosis team did was it built out its administration. It built out more strategic partnerships that could move its transition forward. And it began developing programs that, when implemented, would accomplish key objectives that were necessary to prove to humanity, who believes that, for the most part, they will believe something when they see it, to prove to humanity that it was believable that Copiosis could be the future. And all of these first 3 phases, the administrative phase, the strategic partnership phase, and the program implementation phase, all depended on application development, which is why at the time, Jarek was elevated to a co-founder, because his technical capability and his understanding of the fundamental philosophy was so aligned with the emergence of this new idea that he brought to the solution the application acumen necessary to move it forward. So Jarek coming on board, as well as the strategic partnerships that came on board, was like divine timing in the pathway that the Copiosis team had developed back then to make Copiosis a reality. And all of these steps moving forward back then emboldened the team and brought more confidence to the team, because they saw evidence playing out in front of them that was proving that their transition process was working. So the first thing they decided to do back in 2016 was to create a couple of demonstration projects to show themselves, to prove to themselves that what they were doing could work. And so they produced a demonstration project in a place called Chico, California, and a demonstration project in Portland, Oregon, to demonstrate whether or not the Copiosis ideas could work. This photo here is a picture of the first team in Portland, Oregon that was working on coordinating the demonstration project in Portland. And then this photo, this archival photo from 2016, shows the group that pulled themselves together in Chico, California to create the demonstration project there. And in these demonstration projects, they ran a beta version of the Copiosis software that was developed by a university in Portland, Oregon at the time, to reward over 17,000 NBR to around 150 combined participants in both projects as they participated in these demonstration projects. As a result of these demonstration projects, Copiosis amassed community level media awareness, so media stories in community newspapers and community radio, which proved another aspect of their transition plan, which was if they were able to produce results on the ground, they would attract not only more participants, but also media coverage, which would amplify their own outreach efforts, which is exactly what happened. So as these two demonstration projects were being run, more and more people started to find out about Copiosis through the media coverage. And as a result of that, 26 locations around the world requested opportunities to run demonstration projects, similar to the ones that were happening in Chico and in Portland. But at the time, the Copiosis team was really small, and so they did not have the ability to manage that much demand. And what's more, the people who were asking for the demonstration projects in these areas around the world really didn't have the acumen to be able to pull it off without a lot of support. And back then, that funding wasn't available. So Copiosis, the implementation team, was overwhelmed with the response. And so they, for a little bit of time, they had kind of collapsed around too much demand. But the demonstration projects at that time showed that the demonstration project strategy was a really good one. And so moving forward from 2020, what the team decided to do was to create a network of demonstration projects using the funding from its strategic partners, so that this network was provided multiple opportunities for an individual to travel from project to project and see various implementation versions of what it would look like to actually live in a Copiosis environment. The third project they developed back in 2020. So the first two were in 2016. The third one was on a piece of property in North Carolina in the United States, where they had 200 acres of development that was tied to a board game, so that people could participate first in the board game and then transition onto the piece of land and experience what they learned in the board game in theory in real life on the land. So that was an amazing first step. And after that project, more people with land came forward and offered the land for potential projects. Simultaneously with the demonstration project transition process was a municipal project process. And in this process, what the team did back in 2020 through 2025 was work with local jurisdictions, so local communities, cities and towns and whatnot, to use the algorithm as a way of codifying for the city leaders the value expressed in net benefit value terms that was already being produced both by municipal operations and the community at large, which allowed the leaders to report to the community members what great good was being produced, and also to identify opportunities for more great good in net beneficial terms. What was really interesting back then was that the dynamic of politics was, and the convergence of technology was such that more and more decisions were moving from the federal or the national level down to the state level and then to the local community level. And as a result of that, more and more leverage for power was existing at that municipal level. And so when Copiosis, the team back then, started engaging with these local municipalities, just like with the demonstration projects. These municipal leaders were talking amongst themselves around nations around the world, and more municipalities wanted to do what the existing participating municipalities wanted to do. So just as the demonstration projects were expanding, so were the municipal projects. And they too, just like the demonstration projects, were generating more and more media coverage and awareness, which was generating more and more general awareness around the world. So there was an amplification happening between the demonstration projects and the municipal projects. But wait, that's not all. The Copiosis team also created an industrial process. And in this industrial process, what it did was the Copiosis team took its net benefit value concept and certified it similar to the LEED certification process that happens today in or back then in 2020 in architecture. And then they approached industries and businesses and offered this certification process through the corporate social responsibility division of these corporations as a way to certify their supply chains and their products and services as net beneficial. Now, of course, back then, hardly any industries or businesses could generate high net benefit value measures because for the most part in capitalism, it's really hard to produce high net benefit value because of the way the system values value. And so even though the certifications were relatively low for industries and business, the process of certification generated more interest and awareness among business leaders in the same way it did with the municipal sector and the same way it did with the demonstration projects. And so more media attention and more interest was being generated as a result of this third process. What's more, as this moved forward, some business leaders started to come to the Copiosis organization and offer their vast wealth and resources to move this whole innovation forward, just like we saw in 2019 and 2020, when some business leaders were going against the federal government in the US in order to take action to preserve the environment when the federal government was unwilling to do so under the Trump administration. So the dynamic had already been established among some industrial leaders where they were interested in seeing Copiosis become more of a reality back then in 2020. So it was really an amazing synergy of three processes coming together, all doing the exact same thing, which was generating awareness and increasing interest through media coverage and other activities. Then something really interesting happened. So there's a member of the Copiosis team who owned a business that represented celebrities in the PR world. And this person connected Copiosis with a couple of celebrities, high-level celebrities actually, who were so interested in Copiosis that they became spokespeople for the organization. And through the strategic partnerships that the organization already had established and these celebrity spokespeople and the programmatic results, more luminaries started to find out about and become interested in what Copiosis was doing. As a result of that, it took this innovation to a whole new level. More news stories and more media started to cover what was going on. And as a result of the PR that was being produced, more participation started to occur. Organizations such as technology, I think it's entertainment and design, invited Copiosis to come and speak at the TED events. Podcasts around the world started to interview members of the Copiosis team. The Copiosis organization produced essay contests in universities and high school to galvanize student interest. Mainstream news and others had the founder of Copiosis on to speak. More social media exposure was happening. Netflix produced a series about Copiosis and a documentary. It was crazy what was going on back then, and more corporate attention and support through corporate social responsibility started to generate as a result of everything Copiosis was doing. And that produced this organizational chart of the organization, where at the center of the organization was the MBR or the MBV application that fueled the demonstration projects, the industrial projects, the municipal projects, and the political activity that was happening all across the world. As a result of all that, copiosis became recognized among major sectors worldwide. And as a result of all the things that were happening in the world around copiosis, a first mover nation arose. Now, at this point, we have to look at the fact that outside of time, there are probable and alternate future realities that could have occurred as a result of all this activity happening. And if I were to, at this moment, speak about one of those probable future realities, the potential of collapsing into that specific future reality is really high. And so rather than talking about a specific first mover nation, let's just talk about the first mover nation in all of these probable future realities and what it looked like when this first mover nation decided to go copiosis. So the first thing that happened when this nation declared that it was going to go copiosis was a slippery slope started to happen. And the other nations, when they heard that this major industrial nation was going to move forward with this cockamamie idea, it scared a lot of the other nations. And so there was a huge danger that there would potentially be military retaliation on this major industrial nation, because moving forward with copiosis in the minds of the other nations posed some serious economic threats to those countries. And so a lot of diplomacy had to take place in order to pacify and mollify those other nations. There also had to be some agreements that were necessary in order for the economies of the nations to weather the storm that was going to be wrought upon them as a result of this major industrial nation going with copiosis. You can imagine how debt and assets and interconnectedness between nations could potentially be threatened by something like one of these major nations deciding to do something that was totally contrary to everything else that the other nations were doing. And so diplomacy became a major factor in the transition. So skipping over some of that really dire period that posed a lot of potential threat. It was kind of like World War II when America had possession of the nuclear bombs. I mean, any probable future reality could have stemmed from that. And thank goodness we realized the probable future reality where no nuclear war actually happened. The same thing happened with the probable future realities that copiosis opened the door to. So let's take a look at what life was like inside this first mover nation for the individuals that were living there. So the first person we want to talk about is Z. So, and by the way, he's Asian, but the first mover nation was not necessarily an Asian country. So Z was a diplomat in the first mover nation. He had 3 kids, a wife, a $1 million mortgage on his house, and a $150,000 car loan. And at the transition, all debt from the national level all the way down to the individual level was eliminated by transitioning the value of all debt into net benefit rewards, thereby crediting all of the creditors for the value of that debt and leaving the debtors free of the debt and in ownership of the collateral that the debt was attached to. So Z got to keep his house with no mortgage going forward, while his bank that held the mortgage was left free and clear and whole as a result of being credited with 1 million MBR plus another quantity of MBR that represented the interest that was due on that mortgage. So the mortgage holder, the bank, was totally okay with Z taking over ownership of his house because they were getting a million plus MBR to satisfy the value of that mortgage. And the same thing happened with the car loan. Z's credit union was more than happy to take the MBR because it was the same as getting the money as they moved forward. Meanwhile, anytime that G participated with his kids, like taking them to school or helping them do their homework, or even going to the grocery store to buy groceries for his family, he received MBR for that activity because that activity produced net beneficial value. As a matter of fact, when Xi's first child was born and every child thereafter, those children immediately started getting NBR also, because the value that they provide, the net benefit value that they provide to Xi and his wife, was really inestimable in terms of the satisfaction that Xi and his wife get in being parents to their children. And in fact, Xi's grandparents were getting value from these kids when they were first born too. So as these kids grew up in Copiosis, they didn't have to worry about where they were going to get money from, or where their food was coming from, or their clothing, or their education and their healthcare, because necessities were provided to everyone at no cost. And with regard to what they were going to do to receive NBR, they didn't have to worry about that either, because ever since their birth, they were receiving NBR. So they were free and clear to do whatever it is they wanted to do in life, to follow their passions. And as a result of that, they had a totally different life experience than they would have had they grown up in whatever economic system this first mover nation had at the time. Meanwhile, Xi had to travel outside of the Copiosis nation in order to do diplomacy with the other countries that had not adopted Copiosis at the time. And it's really cool because inside of Copiosis, there was an inventor who used to work as a hedge fund manager. And he knew that people like Xi, if they traveled outside of the Copiosis nation, they were going to need debt-based currencies, while the other countries had not yet moved to Copiosis. And so what this person did was he invented a way for people who visited the Copiosis nation on tourism could bring their debt-based notes and transfer or transition or convert that currency into NBR while they were in the Copiosis nation, so that they could use their newly transitioned or converted NBR to participate in the Copiosis economy. And as more and more of that cash became available, this inventor offered as a luxury to Xi the cash that he needed to go visit these other countries, so that he could live in those countries when he needed to conduct his diplomatic affairs. Now, all the other things that he needed were provided to him by similar inventors in the Copiosis economy, and in return for providing those things to Xi, the inventors of those things and everyone who participated in the inventing of those things received NBR. So Xi could participate in his diplomatic affairs outside of the Copiosis nation without necessarily him having to have a job to provide him with the currency he needed in those countries to do his diplomatic affairs. It was a brilliant way of enabling Xi to move the Copiosis innovation forward. So life got really easy for Xi and his family. So now let's look at Hossein. So Hossein is a farmer. He, as you can see by the picture, he grows green apples. And as a farmer, he produces these apples and then distributes them to wholesale distributors, who then distribute them to grocery stores, both large and small. He has 100 people that works alongside him on his farm, and he has a fully developed supply chain of vendors and suppliers. And everybody who participates with Hossein to move apples from apple trees to wherever they end up in the mouths of human beings, he gets net benefit reward for. And so does everyone else who participates in that process. In addition to that, if someone comes to Hossein and offers to him a new way to run his farm that can produce more net benefit value, and Hossein adopts that new way, the person or people who develop that new way of operating the farm also gets net benefit reward. So Hossein doesn't have to pay anybody who comes with a new idea or a innovation that can improve his farm. He doesn't even have to pay the people that are working on the farm, because the people that are working on the farm are receiving NBR to the degree that the farm operation is net beneficial. And the more Hossein innovates on his farm to make it more net beneficial, the more everyone on the farm gets an NBR. So for example, Hossein realized that when he prunes his trees, if he takes the clippings from pruning the trees and composts them and turns them into soil, and then provides that soil to other farms nearby or to specialty herbalists or other people who need soil, his farm receives more MBR for the sustainable practice of turning tree clippings into compost. And when he takes apples that are not fit to go into grocery stores or mom and pop stores, and he provides those apples to hog farmers or other farmers that might use those rotten or unsightly apples in ways other than human consumption, he gets even more MBR. And so does everyone else who works on that farm. And when human beings eat his apples, those apples are producing nutritional value. And so for every human being that eats one of Hosseин's apples, he receives a revenue or a net benefit reward stream, recognizing the persistent nutritional value provided by the apples that human beings are eating. And so in Copiosis, business becomes a no-cost business. It doesn't cost anyone to operate businesses inside of the first mover nation. So now let's talk about Dylan. Dylan was shocked when he first found out about Copiosis. He didn't believe it was possible, but the more he discovered about it, the more excited he got about it. Dylan is a surgeon and he's going through a divorce. He's going through a divorce because when his wife found out about Copiosis, she was super excited, especially recognizing that she could receive what used to be called income with her not having to do very much. And one of the reasons why she married Dylan, and she's kind of chagrined to say this, was because she was looking for a trophy husband. But Dylan didn't turn out to be very much of a trophy. Even though he was a surgeon, he was a butthole to be within the family. And so she decided, once Copiosis transitioned the society, that she was not going to stay with Dylan anymore, and she didn't need to. There are a lot of people back in the 20th and 21st century who had gotten married for reasons other than love. A lot of times they got married for economic security reasons. And a lot of those people decided that they were no longer going to stay married in Copiosis because it freed them to no longer have to do things they didn't want to do in order to get money. At the same time, their two young children, just like G's children before, were receiving MBR the minute the system transitioned from capitalism to the new system. And so the children started to act more autonomously from the parents because all basic necessities are provided to everyone. Why do they necessarily have to follow the rules of the parents? And so Dylan used to say, after coming home from a hard day's work at the operating table, it's either my way or the highway. Do what I say, not what I do. And that frustrated those kids because they knew that was not necessarily the best way to live life. And so they started to do their own thing, and they had all the necessities that they need to do their own thing as they got older. And so Copiosis changed the nature of the family, which was a very good thing for many, many people. So now let's talk about Sally. Sally was a recent college graduate, and one of the things that she wanted to do was to explore being an ocean, I think it's called an oceanographer, someone who studies the oceans. And she had a love of sea turtles. And before she left college, she answered a bulletin announcement of a person written by a person who owned a ship. And this person was looking for people, interns really, who'd be willing to crew the ship so on his expedition studying sea turtles. But Sally never heard from this person by the time she graduated. And so she wanted to live in this special place in this first mover nation. But this special place was relatively small and had limited supply of housing. Still, she believed that her dreams could come true. And so she contacted someone in this community. This person's name is Mabel. She, in Copiosis, is known as a coordinator. So Mabel is someone who coordinates the ins and outs of activities that are happening in this little community. And so she contacted Mabel, and Mabel invited Sally to come in and tour this community because Sally was really interested in finding out more about this community and whether or not she could live there. But because the inventory of housing in this location was really tight, there wasn't really any place that Sally could live on her own. But there was an engineer there who remotely worked in Silicon Valley. Ooh, I just identified the first mover nation. Ignore that. So there's this engineer who lived remotely and was working on these very successful projects, and he happened to have an auxiliary dwelling unit in his very large home property. And when Sally met this person told Sally that he needed a personal assistant, someone who could help him manage his daily affairs. And if she'd be willing to do that, she could live in the auxiliary dwelling unit without having to give up any MBR. Well, Sally was really excited about that. And so she went back home and started preparing to move to this township. Meanwhile, Mabel, the coordinator who helped Sally meet this engineer, received MBR for the value of connecting Sally with this engineer. And once Sally moved into the auxiliary dwelling unit, Mabel would receive even more MBR. But then something interesting happened. The person who owned the ship reached out to Sally after like 6 months of her graduating and offered Sally a place on his ship. And of course, Sally was thrilled with the opportunity. And so she decided to take the opportunity to go on the ship. And as a result of being on that ship, she discovered something unique about sea turtles that no one had discovered before. And as a result of that, she became famous. And as a result of her fame and the results of her research, she started receiving her own NBR in addition to the MBR she was getting from being a crew member on the ship and contributing to research. Well, over time, Mabel was really attached to Sally because she was such a nice person and she really wanted to keep in touch with her. And so Mabel had followed Sally throughout her illustrious career. And it just so happened that there was an older couple who owned a little bungalow in that special place that Sally wanted to live. And they were about to move to a new location and wanted to transition their beautiful little bungalow to someone who would really appreciate it. And Mabel knew this. And Sally's time on the boat, it just happened to be concluding right about that time. And so Mabel reached out to Sally and offered her this bungalow. And Sally moved in there and everyone was happy. Now let's talk about Dimitri. Dimitri is a wafer tech in a chip fabrication facility. Now, this isn't potato chips, this is microchips. And what he does in this fab is he works with the giant processor tools to make sure that wafer ingots are turned into little bitty silicon chips. And he is processing probably thousands, if not millions of chips a week in his role as a tool operator. As a result of connecting with all of these chips, without Dimitri working on the assembly line in this fabrication facility, these chips would not be being produced. So his net benefit value is huge because these chips, they go in cell phones and PDAs and computers and cars and rocket ships and all kinds of devices use these computer chips. So you can imagine the net benefit value Dimitri is producing as a result of managing these wafer ingots from silicon all the way to computer chips. It's tremendous. And so he's getting untold streams of income just from the work he's doing inside this wafer manufacturing facility. But in addition to that, he also loves motorcycles and he belongs to this motorcycle group or this club. And every time Dimitri organizes an adventure for his club, traveling to a local or a distant community and enjoying the stops along the way, and he's organizing waypoints along the way and making sure people are safe on the trip, and when they get to the destination and then return back home, making sure everyone's satisfied and happy and excited about what's going on. Dimitri is getting NBR for that volunteer activity. Because why? His motorcycle club is producing community and affiliation and enjoyment for the club members. That has net benefit value. So in addition to receiving untold net benefit rewards for his work inside the factory, Dimitri is also getting net benefit rewards for the volunteer work he does for his club. So this is Justice Dupree. Justice Dupree is a judge who works in the First Mover Nation. And in terms of justice, a judge is on the back end of how justice works in Copiosis. And what Justice Dupree realized is that that's what he is. He's ending up having to deal with people who have come to the very end of the justice system. And he wanted to do something different. He wanted to be more proactive in terms of his involvement in justice. So as a judge in Copiosis, Justice Dupree has wide latitude with regard to the decisions he makes relative to doling out justice. So justice in Copiosis isn't about punishment. It's about recidivism. It's about causing people to become better than they were when they committed whatever act they committed that got them involved with the justice system. So Justice Dupree invented many different proactive approaches to dealing with quote unquote crime in Copiosis, in addition to the ways that Copiosis already proactively eliminates crime. And as a result of the innovations he produced, Justice Dupree left the bench and became an innovator, helping communities proactively implement new ways of dealing with crime at a proactive level, so that fewer and fewer people ended up on the back end, thereby needing some sort of intervention that resulted in people ending up having to be punished, put into prisons, or otherwise harmed and removed from society. In addition to his innovation in the justice program, he also volunteered with the LGBT community and helped the LGBT community embrace some of the values of Copiosis and become more effective in the Copiosis economy. And as a result of that, he received MBR for that contribution also. On the other side of the criminal justice spectrum is Chuck. As you can see, Chuck is a police officer. And in Copiosis, Chuck's job totally changed. Instead of apprehending criminals, although he did still do some of that, the majority of Chuck's time was spent working with organizations at the community level to ensure that citizens were receiving all of the necessities that they needed, because the more necessities people received at no cost to them, the less desperate they were, the less insecure they were, the more sure they were, the more relaxed they were, the more they had time to spend time thinking about what they could do that would satisfy their own intimate passions. And so Chuck realized that he received more MBR when he was facilitating all of that than when he was apprehending criminals. Now, thankfully, because of Copiosis, there were fewer criminals because it was harder to commit crime in an environment where there's no money and where MBR could not be taken from people, it was very difficult to swindle people because no one would want to participate in your swindling activities, because swindling activities produces no net benefit value. And so Chuck was able to spend more and more of his time proactively preventing crime rather than going after criminals. We like to say that police officers in Copiosis are peace officers, not police officers. The last story I want to tell is Nelson's story. Before the transition happened, people like Nelson were seen as pariahs. And a lot of conservatives were concerned that people like Nelson were going to be a drain on the economy if they were not forced to earn a living. For many years, Nelson did nothing. He sat on his couch and played video games, and he thought that he was taking advantage of the Copiosis system and subsisting off of necessities, who his family was more than willing to provide because they loved him. And so did his fellow community members. But as he was playing his computer games and smoking marijuana, he started to get bored with the computer game engagement. But while he was playing those computer games, he was providing a lot of value to the computer game makers and building community with other computer game players. And that had net benefit value to that community, just like Dimitri produced value with his motorcycle club. So believe it or not, Nelson was receiving MBR for playing his computer games. And while he was playing his computer games, he had an epiphany. So after a while of playing computer games and starting to get bored playing his computer games, he had an epiphany. And his epiphany was, wow, I wonder if I could talk about or review new computer games as they came out and share my reviews online. Would that have value to my computer game community? And so that's what he started to do. And then he started to interview other computer game players and talked about how they implemented their strategies in the computer games. And then he started talking about new innovations that players were innovating inside of the computer games. And as a result of this, Nelson created a whole new industry within the computer game community that generated a lot of net benefit value, which just goes to show that doing nothing is not doing nothing. So the goal of Copiosis is to create this real freedom for every individual human being. And we define it in a specific way. And here's how we define it. We believe that when everybody has this level of freedom, it allows them to identify, tap into, and express their passion. Now, it's obvious that people on this call don't have a problem identifying what they're passionate about, but we do know that there are a lot of people who do not have connection to their passion. And then there are other people who are connected to their passion, but they can't express their passion because they're too busy trying to earn a living, working a job that isn't in any way connected with their passion. And so Copiosis intends to provide an opportunity for people to relax and then tap into their passion. And as a result of that, to identify what really floats their boat. And when they do that, they can't help but produce net benefit value for themselves and for others. So after that, after the first mover nation took hold and started to show to the rest of the world how beneficial Copiosis is and can be for the world, the other nations followed suit. And as a result of many years of Copiosis being in place, something really interesting happened. Almost everybody on the planet became a net benefit billionaire. There was so much net benefit rewards floating around, people started to wonder, what am I going to do with all this net benefit awards? I don't have to use it to buy anything that I need. All I'm doing is spending it on these really cool luxury items. Why are we all needing these net benefit rewards? And as a society, as a global society, what humanity decided was, let's just give up this Copiosis framework, since everybody's already enjoying living from their passions and creating from their passions, and the world has transformed as a result of this. Let's just live our lives and live from the our intrinsic satisfaction that comes from enjoying our passions. And that's what we ended up with. The ultimate end state of Copiosis, which is to leave humanity living in a gift economy. Thank you very much for listening. That's the story.